Chapter 7 of The Well at the World's End, Book 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, contact LibriVox.org. The lady tells of the strife and trouble that befell her after her coming to the country of the king's son. When we came to the king's house, my lord followed his father into the hall where sat his mother amongst her damsels. She was a fair woman, and looked rather meek than high-hearted. My lord led me up to her, and she embraced and kissed him and caressed him long. Then she turned about to me, and would have spoken to me, but the king, who stood behind us, scowled on her, and she forbore. But she looked me on somewhat kindly, and yet as one who is afeard. Thus it went for the rest of the day, and my lord had me to sit beside him in the great hall when the banquet was holden, and I ate and drank with him and beheld all the pageants by his side, and none meddled with me either to help or to hinder, because they feared the king. Yet many eyes I saw that desired my beauty. And so, when night came, he took me to his chamber and his bed, as if I were his bride new-wedded, even as it had been with us on the grass of the wilderness and the bracken of the wildwood. And then at last he spake to me of our case, and bade me fear not, for that a band of his friends, all armed, was keeping watch and ward in the cloister without. And when I left the chamber on the morrow's morn, there were they yet, all in bright armour, and amongst them the young knight who had delivered me from the felon baron, and he looked mournfully at me, so that I was sorry for his sorrow. And I knew now that the king was minded to slay me, else had he bidden thrust me from my lord's side. So wore certain days, and on the 7th night, when we were come into our chamber, which was as fair as any house outside of heaven, my lord spake to me in a soft voice, and bade me not do off my raiment, for, said he, this night we must flee the town, or we shall be taken and cast into prison tomorrow, for thus hath my father determined. I kissed him and clung to him, and he no less was good to me. And when it was the dead of night, we escaped out of our window by a knotted rope which he had made ready, and beneath was the city wall, and that company of knights, amongst whom was the young knight above said, had taken a postern thereby, and were abiding us armed and with good horses. So we came into the open country, and rode our ways with a mind to reach a hill castle of one of those young barons, and to hold ourselves there in despite of the king. But the king had been as wary as we were privy, and no less speedy than we, and he was a mighty and deft warrior, and he himself followed us on the spur with certain of his best men at arms, and they came upon us as we rested in a woodside not far from our house of refuge, and the king stood by to see the battle with his sword in his sheath. But soon it was at an end, for though our friends fought valiantly, they were every one slain or hurt, and but few escaped with bare life. But that young man who loved me so sorely crept up to me grievously hurt, and I did not forbear to kiss him once on the face, for I deemed I should die also, and his blood stained my sleeve and my wrist. But he died not as then, but lived to be a dear friend to me for long. So we, my lord and I, were led back to the city, and he was held in ward, and I was cast into prison with chains and hunger and stripes. And the king would have had me lie there till I perish, that I might be forgotten utterly. But there were many of the king's knights who murmured at this, and would not forget me. So the king, being constrained, had me brought forth to be judged by his bishops of sorcery for the beguiling of my lord. Long was the tale to me then, but I will not make it long for thee. As was like to be, I was brought in guilty of sorcery, and doomed to be burned in the great square in 3 days' time. Nay, my friend, thou hast no need to look so troubled, for thou seest I was not burned. This is the self-same body that was tied to the stake in the market-place of the king's country many a year ago. For the friends of my lord, young men for the most part, and many who had been fain to be my friends also, put on their armour, and took my lord out of the courteous prison wherein he was, and came to the great square, when as I stood naked in my smock, bound amid the and I saw the sheriff's men give back, and great noise and rumour rise up around me. And then all about me was a clear space for a moment, and I heard the tramp of the many horse hoofs, and the space was full of weaponed men shouting and crying out, "Life for our Lord's Lady! Then a minute, and I was loose and in my lord's arms, and they brought me a horse, and I mounted, lest the worst should come and we might have to flee. So I could see much of what went on, and I saw that all the unarmed folk and lookers-on were gone. But at our backs was a great crowd of folk with staves and bows, who cried out, "Life for the lady!" But before us was naught but the sheriff's sergeants and a company of knights and men-at-arms, about as many as we were, and the king in front of them, fully armed, his face hidden by his helm, and a royal surcoat over his hauberk, beaten with his bearing, to wit, a silver tower on a blue sky bestarred with gold. And now I could see that despite the bills and bows behind us, the king was going to fall on with his folk, and to say sooth I feared but little, and my heart rose high within me, and I wished I had a sword in my hand to strike once for life and love. But lo! Just as the king was raising his sword, and his trumpet was lifting the brass to his lips, came a sound of singing, and there was come the bishop, and the abbot of St. Peter's, and his monks with him, and cross-bearers and readers and others of the religious, and the bishop bore in his hand the blessed host, as now I know it was, under a golden canopy, and he stood between the two companies and faced the king, while his folk sang, loud and sweet, about him.
Then the spears went up, and from the rest, and swords were sheathed, and there went forth 3 ancient knights from out of the king's host, and came up to him and spake with him. Then he gat him away unto the high house. And the 3 old knights came to our folk, and spake with the chiefs, but not with my lord, and I heard not what they said. But my lord came to me in all loving kindness, and brought me into the house of one of the lineage, and into a fair chamber there, and kissed me, and made much of me, and brought me fair raiment, and did it on me with his own hands, even as his wont was to be for my tire-maiden. Then in a little while came those chiefs of ours, and said that truce had been hanselled for them for this time, but on these terms, that my lord and I, and all those who had been in arms, and whosoever would, that feared the king's wrath, should have leave to depart from his city, so that they went and abode no nearer than 50 miles thereof, they should know his further pleasure. Albeit that whosoever would go home peaceably might abide in the city still, and need not fear the king's wrath if he stirred no further, but that in any case the sorceress should get her gone from those walls. So we rode out of the gates that very day before sunset, for it was now midsummer again, and it was 3 hours before noon that I was to have been burned. And we were a gallant company of men-at-arms and knights. Yet did I bethink me of those who were slain on that other day, when we were taken, and fain had I been that they were riding with us. But at least that fair young man was in our company, though still weak from his hurts, for the prison and the process had worn away well nigh 2 months. True it is that I rejoiced to see him, for I had deemed him dead. Dear friend, I pray thy pardon if I weary thee with making so long a tale of my friends of the past days, but needs must I tell thee somewhat of them, lest thou love that which is not, since truly it is myself that I would have thee to love, and none other. Many folk gathered to us as we rode our ways to a town which was my lord's own, and where all men were his friends, so that we came there with a great host, and sat down there in no fear of what the king might do against us. There was I duly wedded to my lord by a bishop of Holy Church, and made his lady and queen, for even so he would have it. And now began the sore troubles of that land, which had been once so peaceful and happy, the tale whereof I may one day tell thee, or rather many tales of what befell me therein, but not now, for the day weareth, and I still have certain things that I must needs tell thee. We waged war against each other, my lord and the king, and whiles one and whiles the other overcame. Either side belike deemed that one battle or 2 would end the strife, but so it was not, but it endured year after year, till fighting became the chief business in all the land. As for me, I had many tribulations. Thrice I fled from the stricken field with my lord to hide in some stronghold of the mountains. Once was I taken of the foemen of the town where I abode when my lord was away from me, and a huge slaughter of innocent folk was made, and I was cast into prison and chains, after I had seen my son that I had borne to my lord slain before mine eyes. At last we were driven clean out of the kingdom of the tower, and abode a long while, some 2 years, in the wilderness, living like outlaws and wolves' heads, and lifting the spoil for our livelihood. Forsooth, of all the years that I abode about the land of the Tower, those were the happiest, for we robbed no poor folk and needy, but rewarded them rather, and drave the spoil from rich men and lords and hard-hearted chapman folk. We ravished no maid of the tillers, we burned no cot, and taxed no husbandman's croft or acre, but defended them from their tyrants. Nevertheless we gat an ill name wide about through the kingdoms and cities, and were devils and witches to the boot of thieves and robbers in the mouths of these men. For when the rich man is hurt, his wail goeth heavens high, and none may say he heareth not. Now it was at this time that I first fell in with the champions of the Dry Tree, for they became our fellows and brothers in arms in the wildwood, for they had not as yet builded their stronghold of the Scaur, whereas thou and I shall be in 2 days' time. Many a wild deed did our folk do in their company, and many that had been better undone, whiles indeed they went on journeys wherein we were not partakers, as when they went to the north and harried the lands of the Abbot of Higham, and rode as far even as over the downs to Bear Castle, and fought a battle there with the captain of Higham, whereas we never went out of the wood Perilous to the northward, and lifted little, save in the lands of our own proper foemen, but friends of the king. Now I say not of the men of the Dry Tree that they were good and peaceable men, nor would mercy hold their hands every while that they were hard bestead and thrust in a corner. Yet I say now, and once for all, that their fierceness was and is but kindness and pity when set against the cruelty of the Burg of the Four Friths, men who have no friend to love, no broken foe to forgive, and can scarce be kind even to themselves, though forsooth they be wise men and cautelous and well living in the world and wealthy and holy. She stayed her speech a while, and her eyes glittered in her flushed face, and she set her teeth, and she was as one beside herself till Ralph kissed her feet and caressed her, and she went on again. Dear friend, when thou knowest what these men are and have been, thou wilt bless thy friend Roger for leading thee forth from the burg by night and cloud, whatever else may happen to thee. Well, we abode in the wildwood, friends and good fellows from the first, and that young man, though he loved me ever, was somewhat healed of the fever of love, and was my faithful friend, in such wise that neither I nor my lord had aught to find fault with in him. Meanwhile we began to grow strong, for many joined us therein, who had fled from their tyrants of the good towns, and the manors of the baronage, and at last, in the 3rd year, naught would please my lord but we must enter the kingdom of the Tower, and raise his banner in the wealthy land and the fair cities. Moreover, his father, the king of the Tower, died in his bed in these days, and no word of love or peace had passed between them since that morning when I was led out to be burned in the great square. So we came forth from the forest, we and the champions of the Dry Tree, and made the tale a short one. For the king, the mighty warrior and wise man, was dead, and his captains of war, some of them were dead, and some weary of strife, and those who had been eager in debate were falling to ask themselves wherefore they had fought, and what was to do that they should still be fighting. And lo, when it came to be looked into, it was all a matter of the life and death of one woman, to wit me myself. And why should she not live? Why should she not sit upon the throne with the man who loved her? Therefore, when at last we came out from the twilight of the woods into the sunny fields of the land of the Tower, there was no man to naysay us. Nay, the gates of the strong palaces flew open before the wind of our banners, and the glittering of our spears drew the folk together towards the places of rejoicing. We entered the master city in triumph, with the houses hung high with green boughs, and the maidens casting flowers before our feet, and I sat, a crowned queen, upon the throne, high raised on the very place where erst I stood, awaiting the coming of the torch to the me. Then there began the reign of the woman of the waste, for so it was that my lord left to my hands the real ruling of the kingdom, though he wore the crown and set the seal to parchments. As to them of the Dry Tree, though some few of them abode in the kingdom, and became great there, the more part of them went back to the wild wood and lived the old life of the wood, as we had found them living it aforetime. But or ever they went, the leaders of them came before me, and kissed my feet, and with tears and prayers besought me, and bade me that if aught fell amiss to me there, I should come back to them and be their lady and queen. And whereas these wild men loved me well, and I deemed that I owed much to their love and their helping, I promised them and swore to them by the water of the well at the world's end that I would do no less than they prayed me, albeit I set no term or year for the day that I would come to them. And now my lord and I, we set ourselves to heal the wounds which war had made in the land, and hard was the work and late the harvest, so used had men become to turmoil and trouble. Moreover, there were many, and chiefly the women, who had lost husband, lover, son, or brother, who laid all their griefs on my back, though forsooth how was I guilty of the old king's wrath against me, which was the cause of all? About this time my lord had the castle of Abundance built up very fairly, for me and him to dwell in at whiles, and indeed we had before that dwelt at a little manor house that was there, when we durst withdraw a little from the strife. But now he had it done as fair as ye saw it, and had those arras cloths made with the story of my sojourn in the wilderness, even as ye saw them. But the days and the years wore, and wealth came back to the mighty of the land, and fields flourished, and the acres bore increase, and fair houses were builded in the towns, and the land was called happy again. But for me I was not so happy, and I looked back fondly to the days of the greenwood and the fellowship of the dried tree, and the days before that of my flight with my lord. And moreover, with the wearing of the years, those murmurs against me and the blind causeless hatred began to grow again, and chiefly, methinks, because I was the king, and my lord the king's cloak. But therewith tales concerning me began to spring up, how that I was not only a sorceress, but even one foredoomed from of old and sent by the lords of hell, to wreck that fair land of the Tower, and make it unhappy and desolate. And the tale grew and gathered form, till now, when the bloom of my beauty was gone, I heard hard and fierce words cried after me in the streets when I fared abroad, and that still chiefly by the women, for yet most men looked on me with pleasure. Also my counsellors and lords warned me often that I must be wary and of great forbearance, if trouble were to be kept back. Now amidst these things, as I was walking pensively in my garden one summer day, it was told me that a woman desired to see me, so I bade them bring her. And when she came I looked on her, and deemed that I had seen her aforetime. She was not old, but of middle age, of dark red hair and brown eyes, somewhat small, not a big woman, but well fashioned of body, and looking as if she had once been exceedingly dainty and trim. She spake, and again I seemed to have heard her voice before. "Hail, Queen," she said, "it does my heart good to see thee thus in thy glorious estate." So I took her greeting, but those tales of my being but a sending of the devil for the ruin of that land came into my mind, and I sent away the folk who were thereby before I said more to her. Then she spake again. "Even so I guessed it would be that thou wouldst grow great among women." But I said, "What is this? And when have I known thee before time?" She smiled and said naught, but my mind went back to those old days, and I trembled, and the flesh crept upon my bones, lest this should be the coming back in a new shape of my mistress whom I had slain. But the woman laughed and said, as if she knew my thoughts, "Nay, it is not so. The dead are dead, fear not. But hast thou forgotten the Dale of Law?" "Nay," said I, "never. And art thou then the carline that learned me law? But if the dead come not back, how do the old grow young again? For 'tis a score of years since we two sat in the dale, and I longed for many things." Said the woman, "The dead may not drink of the well at the world's end, yet the living may, even if they be old, and that blessed water giveth them new might and changeth their blood, and they are as young folks for a long while again after they have drunken." "And hast thou drunken?" said I. "Yea," she said, "but I am minded for another draught." I said, "And wherefore hast thou come to me, and what shall I give to thee?" She said, "I will take no gift of thee as now, for I need it not, though hereafter I may ask a gift of thee. But I am to ask this of thee, if thou wilt be my fellow farer on the road thither." "Yea," said I, "and leave my love, and my lord, and my kingship which he hath given me, for this I will tell thee, that all that here is done by me." "Great is thy kingship, lady," said the woman, and smiled withal. Then she sat silent a little, and said, "When 6 months are worn, it will be springtide. I will come to thee in the spring days, and know what thy mind is then. But now I must depart." Quoth I, "Glad shall I be to talk with thee again, for thou hast learned me much of wisdom, and yet much more I need, yea, as much as the folk here deem I have already." "Thou shalt have no less," said the woman. Then she kissed my hands and went her ways, and I sat musing still for a long while, because for all my gains, and my love that I had been loved withal, and the greatness that I had gotten, there was as it were a veil of unhappiness wrapped around my heart. So wore the months, and ere the winter had come befell an evil thing, for my lord, who had loved me so, and taken me out of the wilderness, died, and was gathered to the fathers, and there was I left alone, for there was no fruit of my womb by him alive. My firstborn son had been slain by those wretches, and a second son that I bore had died of a pestilence that war and famine had brought upon the land. I will not wear thy soul with words about my grief and sorrow, but it is to be told that I sat now in a perilous place, and yet I might not step down from it and abide in that land, for then it was a sure thing that some of my foes would have laid hands on me and brought me to judgment for being but myself, and I should have ended miserably. So I gat to me all the strength that I might, and whereas there were many who loved me still, some for my own sake, and some for the sake of my lord that was, I endured in good hope that all my days were not done. Yet I longed for the coming of the teacher of law, for now I made up my mind that I would go with her, and seek to the well at the world's end for weal and woe. She came while April was yet young, and I need make no long tale of how we gat us away, for whereas she was wise in hidden lore, it was no hard matter for her to give me another semblance than mine own, so that I might have walked about the streets of our city from end to end, and none had known me. So I vanished away from my throne and my kingdom, and that name and fame of a witch wife clove to me once and for all, and spread wide about the cities of folk and the kingdoms, and many are the tales that have arisen concerning me, and belike some of these that thou hast heard told." Ralph reddened and said, "My soul has been vexed by some inkling of them, but now it is at rest from them for ever." "May it be so," she said, "and now my tale is wearing thin for the present time." Back again went my feet over the ways they had trodden before, though the teacher shortened the road much for us by her wisdom. Once again, what need to tell thee of these ways when thine own eyes shall behold them as thou wendest them beside me? Be it enough to say that once again I came to that little house in the uttermost wilderness, and there once more was the garth and the goat-house, and the trees of the forest beyond it, and the wood-lawns and the streams, and all the places and things that erst I deemed I must dwell amongst for ever. Said Ralph, "And did the carline keep troth with thee? Was she not but luring thee thither to be her thrall? Or did the book that I read in the Castle of Abundance but lie concerning thee?" "She held her truth to me in all wise," said the lady, "and I was no thrall of hers, but as a sister, or maybe even as a daughter, for ever to my eyes she was the old carline who learned me lore in the dale of the wildwood. But now a long while, years long, we abode in that house of the sorceress ere we durst seek further to the well at the world's end. And yet meseems, though the years wore, they wore me no older. Nay, in the first days at least I waxed stronger of body and fairer than I had been in the king's palace in the land of the Tower, as though some foretaste of the well was there for us in the loneliness of the desert, although forsooth the abiding there amidst the scantiness of livelihood, and the nakedness, and the toil, and the torment of wind and weather, were as a penance for the days and deeds of our past lives. What more is to say concerning our lives here, saving this, that in those days I learned yet more wisdom of the teacher of law, and amidst that wisdom was much of that which ye call sorcery, as the foreseeing of things to come, and the sending of dreams or visions, and certain other matters. And yet I may tell thee that the holy man who came to us last even, I sent him the dream which came to him drowsing, and bade him come to the helping of Walter the Black, for I knew that I should take thy hand and flee with thee this morning, e'en as I have done, and I would fain have a good leech to Walter lest he should die, although I owe him hatred rather than love. Now, my friend, tell me, is this an evil deed, that thou shrink from the sorceress?" He strained her to his bosom and kissed her mouth, and then he said, "Yet thou hast never sent a dream to me." She laughed and said, "What, hast thou never dreamed of me since we met at the want way of the wood perilous?" "Never," said he. She stroked his cheek fondly and said, "Young art thou, sweet friend, and sleepest well o' nights. It was enough that thou thoughtest of me in thy waking hours." And then she went on with her tale. End of chapter 7. Recording by Lucy Kempton.